Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wisdom Nutrition Podcast. This is Alex Sakin. In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you an extended excerpt from the conclusion to my new book, The Coming World Nation. This extended conclusion essay is almost a chapter into itself. It's called The Great Year and the Rebirth of Civilization, and it has several parts to it. I'm going to be reading most of them out with you today, and then I'm going to save a few of them for later on. We'll revisit them in a few months' time. But let me read you the sections that we're going to be going over today. It starts with the philosophy of Armageddon, then the Summer Solstice and the galactic center, the younger Dryas, a global baptism by water, the great year reaches its alpha omega point, the shadow of Atlantis resurfaces, America is the new Atlantis, and the philosophic empire and the world nation. So that's what we're going to be going over today. If you get my book, or if you're a paid subscriber on my Substack, you can access the full book. You can read the whole essay, the whole conclusion, and you'll see there's some additional sections that I'm going to be circling back around to and revisiting in the future, but which we're not going to go over today. And these are called the Technocratic Superstate and the Mystery Schools, the College of the 6 Days Work, and the Technocratic Superstate as an emerging mystery school. So before I go into that, I want to do more episodes on technocracy and on the unique theory about technocracy that I put forward in the book. Once we go over that, those sections will make more sense. But there's important research that I'm sharing in this conclusion essay that we're going to be going over today that has to do with the time cycle called the Great Year, which is basically the precession cycle, a 25,000 year period. And the Great Year, as we'll be discovering, it's at a critical point in its cycle at the current moment that we're living in. So this extraordinary period of time where all these revolutionary things are happening, this is coinciding, as one might expect, with an important period in a larger time cycle that is driving the evolution of planetary development. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. Stay tuned. And we'll be kicking things off with the philosophy of Armageddon coming right up. Okay, the philosophy of Armageddon. Every ancient religious tradition has its own version of an Armageddon myth, a great battle of good versus evil, with the fate of human destiny hanging in the balance. In these myths, transcendent powers are always involved, with satanic forces of corruption seeking to bring mankind to self-destruction, while an angelic hierarchy resists this scheme, striving instead to inspire mankind to liberate itself from the clutches of evil and break through into a new and higher state of consciousness. In these myths, the forces of light always emerge victorious, and afterwards a great spiritual renaissance is initiated. There are different ways of interpreting the meaning of this universal myth. One way is to view it as symbolizing a battle that takes place everywhere in nature, evolution versus dissolution, with energy seeking its own self-optimization and entropy continuously confronting it as an adversarial force of negation. While this battle between creation and destruction is occurring at every moment, at certain key points in time, the struggle between these opposing forces reaches a critical mass and a great Armageddon must occur. For mankind, this becomes a period of trial and testing when the opposing forces of creation and destruction within the human soul must undergo a great showdown with the fate of human destiny hanging in the balance. Eventually, the forces of light win this battle and redeem the forces of darkness, with human civilization progressing into a new and higher stage of evolutionary development as a result of the contest. In this interpretation of the Armageddon myth, the great showdown between progress and resistance occurs not as a single event, but as an archetype that activates at numerous key stages in mankind's evolutionary growth cycle. Philosopher Manly P. Hall expands on this point, stating that the Armageddon doesn't have to do with a specific date or time, but a sequence of events. And every sequence of events comes finally to some kind of an Armageddon. Every period of history goes through this. Every religion will pass through this. The human soul, both individually and collectively, will at key points in its evolutionary pathway undergo Armageddon-like battles, when it finds itself trapped in an existential struggle against the mysterious force of negation within itself. In order to liberate itself from the entropic pull of this resisting force, the spirit within the soul must fight and win a great showdown against it, with victory measured not by the annihilation of that opposing force, but its redemption and assimilation. This process is identical to what Carl Jung described as the fight with the shadow. It is an archetypal battle between the light and dark elements within the human psyche, which every person must experience at key stages of their individuation process. Although this existential battle is a challenging event to go through, there is a deep cleansing purpose behind its occurrence. It forces the soul to purge from itself those elements within it that, quote, have not within them the integrity of their own survival, as Manly Hall describes it. In other words, any element within us that has alternative motivations beyond facilitating our own spiritual advancement becomes entropic in its effect. In the process of evolving, we must continually root out these self-negating elements within us, shining a light where the shadow still lingers. Until the entropic pull of these shadow elements are successfully addressed, they will continuously undermine our growth and erode our self-integration. The arrival of an Armageddon forces an existential confrontation against them, giving the soul no choice but to finally liberate itself from the shadow's pull. In the philosophy of Buddhism, the buildup of shadow complexes within the psyche is correlated with the buildup of negative karma, which accumulates not just within one lifetime, but across a sequence of lifetimes extending deep into the past. When the Armageddon erupts, this accumulated negative karma erupts, forcing the individual to finally address and deal with it. Discussing the karmic underpinning of how and why an Armageddon occurs, Manly Hall writes, quote, "We are told in the Bible that cause and effect follow each other. We are told that as you sow shall you reap." Buddha put it in slightly different words when he says, "Effects follow causes as the wheel of a cart follows the foot of the oxen." Therefore, wherever there is a causation of catastrophe, and that causation is not transmuted, then evil is not corrected. Then, in the due course of time, the catastrophe comes, end quote. In other words, an Armageddon manifests as a concentrated expression of past karma, forcing the individual or group to finally confront and overcome this karma, lest they be destroyed by the negative entropic pull that the shadow exerts upon the human soul. When a person or group succumbs to the influence of their inner shadow, they not only set themselves on a course for self-destruction, but they also go on to outwardly personify its attributes within society, becoming a manifestation of the collective shadow. Consider the drug addicts strung out on Skid Row. They've not only destroyed their own lives, but they also become a blight on society, turning to crime to feed their addiction, which harms other people's lives and entropically erodes the collective social fabric. Consider also the empire. When a nation falls under the control of an avaricious leader and begins to plunder and pillage its neighbors, it comes to personify the spirit of negation on a collective scale. In both cases, a common dynamic is observed. Those who succumb to the pull of entropy from within end up personifying its attributes externally to others. The timing of when an archetypal Armageddon-like event will occur is not arbitrary. They tend to arise at one of two key power points in a time cycle. First, at its midpoint, when the cycle's initial downward descending arch culminates and transitions into an upward ascending motion, and B, at the transition point between cycles, when one cycle ends and a new one begins. The birth of each new time cycle marks the death of a previous one. This occasion marks the occurrence of a death rebirth ritual, where the old pattern dies so that a new one can be born from its ashes. With each new rebirth, there is a progression or advancement that occurs. There is also a new journey, which brings the evolving soul into a new engagement with material existence. After the soul's initial descent into material creation, a major turning point is reached when its orientation shifts from involution to evolution. Involution signifying the initial downward arch of the cycle, and evolution its subsequent upward ascent. The transition point between these two opposing motions marks the occurrence of an epical Armageddon-like event. The cataclysms and transformations that occur during these periods signify the time cycle hitting a bottoming out point. From this moment on, a gradual upward motion ensues, with the ascending pull of evolution winning out over the downward push of involution. In astrology, the horoscope, which can be calculated for persons, groups, nations, or the world as a whole, reveals an interwoven matrix of time cycles operating at different time scales. Each cycle has its own power points and Armageddon-like events. For example, it is routine for people to undergo a period of turmoil and testing during their Saturn return. This marks the point in one's late 20s when Saturn, the planet of discipline, structure, and karma, returns to the zodiac position it originally occupied at the person's time of birth. This occasion marks the end of one Saturn cycle and the beginning of a new one. It often catalyzes a period of existential reckoning where one's ability to handle responsibilities, set boundaries, and demonstrate alignment are tested. When this critical phase in life is reached, if the foundation of one's life has been thus far built on shaky ground, whether due to avoidance, fear, or superficial ambition, the Saturn archetype will dismantle those structures entirely, forcing them to rebuild with greater integrity and purpose. Pluto is another planet whose archetypal influence tends to evoke the themes of Armageddon and how it impacts the horoscope. In astrology, Pluto signifies death, rebirth, and hidden power. At the present moment, the United States is experiencing its Pluto return, with the planet's 248-year cycle around its horoscope coming to an end. This is a highly significant event, signaling the onset of an existential confrontation between the nation and the hidden power structures that secretly dominate its politics, economics, and culture. America's Pluto return marks a period when the concealed forces behind the nation's rise as a global empire must either be brought to the surface and reckoned with, or allowed to consume the nation from within. Today, the foundations of the American empire are fast eroding, with the systems that once sustained its dominance, black budgets, financial hegemony, covert wars, and corporate imperialism, proving increasingly unviable. The Plutonian archetype is forcing an end to this status quo, with the American populace now facing an unavoidable confrontation with the ugly shadow aspects of its government. Nations undergoing their Pluto return must confront their hidden histories and shadow governments. In the case of America, this involves illuminating the role that the capitalist oligarchy and deep state play in driving the U.S. away from its democratic foundations and into the role of becoming an extractive global empire. Pluto's influence is not entirely destructive, however. It can also be revelatory, unearthing suppressed corruption and unrealized potential. In America, this unrealized potential is to be found in the technocratic superstate, the invisible scientific institution whose classified arsenal of ether-based technologies have the power to transform the world, rebirthing civilization into a new age of global prosperity. Note the synchronous interplay of circumstances that are now taking place. At the same time, or at the same moment that the foundations of American empire are beginning to unravel and the deep state's grip on power is beginning to wane, the servicing of the technocratic superstate is also beginning to take place, with the ongoing disclosure of the UFO mystery working to catalyze this process. This motion represents a tremendous upwelling of unrealized potential surfacing within the world system, which the Plutonian archetype, activated by America's Pluto return, is working to surface. And that finishes that first section, the philosophy of Armageddon. So you get a sense that the Armageddon is not a single event, but it signifies a moment of great transition within the world system. Okay, the next section is called the Summer Solstice and the Galactic Center. And in the article, there's visuals that you can see that accompany each of these sections. The overlapping time cycles shaping the lives of individuals, organizations, and nations are each subservient to the single master cycle that drives the evolution of the world system as a whole. All systems are part of one supersystem, and when that supersystem undergoes a major phase change, each of the numerous subsystems operating within its structure is impacted. The evolution of life on Earth is driven at the largest scales by a master cycle that Plato termed the Great Year. This marks a roughly 25,800 year period calculated for the time it takes the North Celestial Pole to make a full rotation around its axis. In other words, it marks the time that it takes for the planet's North Celestial Pole to return to a specific pole star. Today, the pole star is Polaris of the Ursa Minor constellation, and the specific name is Alpha Ursae Minoris. This will not always be the case, however. Because the tilt of the planet's North Celestial Pole rotates in a gradual counterclockwise motion, in time the pole star will shift away from Polaris and point to other stars. And then after 25,800 years, a full cycle is completed and the North Celestial Pole will once again return to Polaris, reestablishing it as the pole star. The Approximately 25,800 year cycle of the pole star not only defines the duration of the great year, it also marks the span of time it takes for the sun's precession cycle to make one complete journey around the zodiac. From our vantage point on Earth, every year the sun makes one full rotation around the constellations, passing through each of the 12 signs. Due to the wobble of the Earth around its north celestial axis, each year the sun exhibits a slight retrograde motion in its circumambulation, taking slightly longer to return to the same zodiacal marker. It takes approximately 72 years for the sun's retrograde motion to move 1 degree back in the zodiac, approximately 2,160 years for it to pass through one of the 12 zodiac signs, and approximately 25,800 years to complete a full cycle around the zodiac. And it should be noted that the size of the constellations vary, as does the length of time the sun resides in each. The sun's precession cycle is typically measured in relation to the spring equinox, the zodiac sign that the sun rises within on the morning of the equinox, marking the zodiacal age of the present moment. Today, the sun rises in the constellation of Pisces, but it is gradually approaching Aquarius, with its formal shift into this new sign occurring in approximately 350 years, according to Manly Hall. When it comes to tracking the long-term development of the great year supercycle, how do we measure its official start and end date? Philosopher Peter Dawkins has contemplated this issue, asking, quote, where does the zodiacal division of the ecliptic, the sun's path through the zodiac, begin and end? How do we know when each age or a great age begins and ends? To calculate the alpha omega point of the great year supercycle, a fixed reference frame is needed. The Milky Way galaxy provides this. The zodiac is intersected at 2 points by the galactic plane of the Milky Way. These 2 galactic markers are situated at diametrically opposing zodiacal points, one at the cusp of Gemini Taurus and the other at the cusp of Sagittarius Scorpio. The cusp of Sagittarius Scorpio is aligned with the core of the Milky Way galaxy, while the cusp of Gemini Taurus marks the point on the zodiac opposite the galactic center, called the galactic anticenter. Together, these 2 points form the major axis of the zodiac, as Peter Dawkins explains, with the rest of the 12 divisions or signs of the zodiac laid out from these markers. According to Peter Dawkins, in the esoteric astrological teachings of the ancient mystery schools, quote, the start of a great age was traditionally understood as being when the summer solstice sun is exactly on the cusp of Gemini Taurus, crossing the galactic center and moving from Gemini into Taurus. At this same moment, the corresponding midwinter sun will be on this cusp of Sagittarius Scorpio, this being the closest the sun ever gets to the galactic center as it appears from Earth. Dawkins informs us that in esoteric philosophy, the galactic center is symbolic of the womb of the Great Mother, wherein divine conception takes place. This idea is reflected in the philosophy of the ancient Greeks, who, as Manly Hall informs us, believed that the spiritual nature of man descended into material existence from the Milky Way, the seed ground of souls. In his book Earth Under Fire, physicist Paul Violette analyzes the relationship between the galactic center and our solar system, noting how the core of the Milky Way periodically emanates bursts of cosmic energy he calls superwaves. During certain key periods in the Great Year supercycle, these superwaves move into our solar system, instigating great cataclysms and transformations. LaViolette warns that, quote, the galactic center is a powerful energy source, periodically releasing massive bursts of cosmic rays that can alter the Earth's climate, destabilize its magnetic field, and even influence solar activity. Opposing the galactic center on the ecliptic is the galactic anticenter, which LaViolette informs us can be seen as the point of reception, where energies stabilize and manifest as new cycles of creation. Peter Dawkins also emphasizes the significance of the anticenter, noting that it marks the alpha omega or AA point of the great year. The entire great year supercycle is key to the interplay of these 2 father-mother points on the zodiac. During 2 key periods in its 25,800 year duration, the annual summer and winter solstices move into direct alignment with these 2 galactic power points. During these rare occasions, Dawkins declares that a channel opens up between the heart of the galaxy and the Earth via the sun, which allows a cosmic baptism of energy and light to pour upon us. There are two ways in which the summer and winter solstices can align with the galactic plane. The first is when the summer solstice aligns with the Gemini-Taurus cusp, the galactic anticenter, and the winter solstice with the Sagittarius-Scorpio cusp, or the galactic center. This alignment signals the end of one great year cycle and the birth of a new great age. The second alignment occurs at the midpoint of the great year cycle when the summer solstice has rotated 180 degrees around the zodiac to occupy the Sagittarius-Scorpio cusp, while the winter solstice shifts onto the Taurus-Gemini cusp. These two alignments, one at the great year's alpha omega point, the other at its midpoint, mark twin periods of profound Armageddon-like transformations on Earth. The first signals the death of one cycle and the birth of another. This is when, as Peter Dawkins puts it, the old phoenix dies and is reborn, renewed, resurrecting from the ashes of its old form. The second marks the cycle's transition from involution to evolution, where spirit's initial downward descent into material creation culminates and transitions into an upward ascent toward liberation and enlightenment. Dawkins relates the timing of these two power points with the occurrence of Armageddon-like periods on Earth. He writes, quote, "These two times, the beginning and the midpoint of each great age, are the times of the destructions. At these times, which occur at approximately 12,000-year intervals, the Earth appears to be bombarded with cosmic super rays emanating from the heart of the galaxy. The galactic heart lies close to the ecliptic cusp of Sagittarius-Scorpio, and so when the solstice sun is on that cusp, it is said that a channel is opened up from the heart of the galaxy to the Earth, down which pours a baptism of water and fire. From the spiritual point of view, these times are associated with the two baptisms, the first by water and the second by air and fire. From the physical point of view, it causes great changes, difficulties, and challenges, with destructions and mutations of species, including the human race. These are major initiatory moments," end quote. The cosmic baptism by water that Dawkins references comes at the midpoint of the Great Year supercycle, while the baptism by fire comes at its AA point, or alpha omega point. These two baptisms are periods of initiatory testing for humanity where it must undergo Armageddon-like ordeals. The ultimate purpose of these baptismal episodes is not to punish humanity, but rather to catalyze its long-term evolutionary development. Bibhudev Misra, the Yuga scholar I cite in this book's introduction essay, has put forward an interesting theory about the structure of the Yuga cycle that parallels Dawkins' framework about the two cosmic baptisms contained within the Great Year. Misra's theory, which he presents in his book Yuga Shift, is rooted in his unique method of aligning the timing of the Kali Yuga with the 25,800-year timetable of the Great Year. Misra states that the core framework of the Yuga cycle is rooted around a 24,000-year master cycle, with an initial 12,000-year descending half cycle followed by a 12,000-year ascending arch. Each 12,000-year period is divided into 4 yugas of equal duration, 2,700 years each, with a 300-year transition period separating each. During the Yuga cycle's initial descending phase, its involutionary arch, there is a downward motion from an initial golden age, or Satya Yuga, to a silver age, or Treta Yuga, to a bronze age, or Dwapara Yuga, until finally an iron age, or Kali Yuga, is reached, where materialism, ignorance, and sin reach their peak. After this dark age concludes, the Yuga cycle then transitions into an upward ascending phase, with the Yuga cycle gradually ascending upward through the Dwapara and Treta Yugas before culminating finally in a return to the Satya Yuga. Compared to the precession cycle, which lasts approximately 25,800 years, the 24,000-year Yuga cycle falls short by about 1,800 years. To account for this discrepancy, Misra explains that the Earth is subjected to 2 extended periods of purging in the course of the Great Year. One is called cataclysmos, meaning deluge, which represents the great winter of the Great Year when the Earth is inundated by water. The other is called ekpyrosis, meaning conflagration, or the great summer of the Great Year when the world is destroyed by fire. Misra proposes that these 2 periods of extended purging last for approximately 900 years each, extending the duration of the Yuga cycle to 25,800 years, the same duration as the precession cycle. So that's the end of that section, and once again that was called the Summer Solstice and the Galactic Center. So you can see that there's 2 points on the zodiac where the galactic equator intersects, and when the summer and winter solstices are tilted into alignment with them, such that the summer solstice sun and the winter solstice sun are both located on the cusp of Gemini Taurus and Sagittarius Scorpio, respectively. This marks a major turning point within a cycle of the great year. So in the next section, we're going to do a case study of the significance of the summer and winter solstices aligning with these two galactic points. And we're going to go back in time and consider a period called the Younger Dryas. So that's what this next section that we're going to be moving into is called the Younger Dryas, a global baptism by water. As we discover, there is a direct alignment in the frameworks of Dawkins and Misra regarding the existence of two Armageddon-like transition periods within the Great Year Supercycle, one equating to a baptism by water and the other to a global baptism by fire. The baptism by water, or cataclysmos, occurs at the cycle's midpoint, coinciding with the summer solstice moving into alignment with the Sagittarius-Scorpio cusp. Astronomically, this event occurred approximately 12,900 years ago, or 10,900 BC, a date of important historical significance. It marks the sudden onset of the Younger Dryas climatic period when a miniature ice age erupted whose characteristics closely matched the archetypal themes of a baptism by water. To understand the significance of the Younger Dryas, we have to first go back and investigate the historical timing of the last ice age, which achieved its last glacial maximum, or LGM, between 26,500 and 19,000 years ago. During this period, vast ice sheets covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. This condition lasted until approximately 15,000 years ago, when the Earth's climate began to transition out of its glacial freeze, entering a period of warming known as the Bowling-Allerod interstitial. This warming period lasted for over 2,000 years before suddenly and unexpectedly reversing. About 12,900 years ago, the Earth returned suddenly to near glacial conditions, with global temperatures plunging by as much as 10 to 15 degrees in some regions. This dramatic climactic episode lasted for about 1,200 years and represents one of the most abrupt and severe climate reversals in the Earth's recent geological history. In his book Yuga Shift, Misra discusses how this period of dramatic global cooling first began, writing that, quote, in 2007, a team of international scientists led by Richard Firestone found compelling evidence that the Earth was bombarded by multiple fragments of a giant disintegrating comet nearly 12,900 years ago, which destabilized the Laurentide ice sheet and triggered the Younger Dryas cooling. This catastrophic event launched a millennial-long period of cataclysms and hardship, just as Misra model predicted, with a series of subsequent cometary impacts striking the Earth in periodic increments throughout the Younger Dryas, each bringing its own set of environmental calamities, including at least one global deluge event. The calamitous environment of the Younger Dryas perfectly matches the archetypal themes of a global baptism by water, or cataclysmos, as described in the frameworks of Dawkins and Misra. Surely it is no coincidence that the Younger Dryas rapid emergence occurred at the precise moment that the summer solstice moved into alignment with the galactic center, marking the midpoint of the Great Year Supercycle. It also cannot be a mere coincidence that the Younger Dryas cooling period ensued for approximately 1,200 years, the exact duration of time predicted by Misra's model for the cataclysmos period of cosmic purging to occur. The Younger Dryas came to an abrupt conclusion around 9,700 BC, the exact moment when the cataclysmos phase of the Great Year would have ended and the Treta Yuga begun. In terms of climate, this historical period marks the beginning of the Holocene, when global temperatures increased drastically, particularly in the northern hemisphere, where temperatures increased between 18 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit in a relatively short period of time. Accompanying this global warming trend was a significant increase in sea levels, with water tables rising worldwide between 33 and 66 feet. Many coastal regions, once heavily populated, would have been submerged during this period, forcing the mass migrations of peoples. The Earth took on its present form at the conclusion of the Younger Dryas, setting the stage for a new phase of human evolution to occur. This transition coinciding with the Great Year moving into a new half cycle. The historical moment when scientists say the Younger Dryas came to its abrupt end, 9700 BC, is significant because Not only does it align with the world's transition out of the cataclysmos phase of the Great Year and into the Treta Yuga, but also because it matches Plato's account of the sinking of Atlantis. According to him, an island continent in the Atlantic Ocean catastrophically sank around 9600 BC, taking with it the capital city of what had once been a great, powerful, globally distributed empire. Manly P. Hall teaches that Plato's account of Atlantis' demise was given as a deliberate blend of historical truth, mythic allegory, and philosophical cipher. By implication, it should not be viewed as an entirely factual historical account, but rather as a truthful historical depiction filtered through the lens of philosophy and myth, with numerous layers of concealed information embedded within its description. The esoteric aspect of Plato's account is particularly noticeable when you factor in his physical description of Atlantis. As Hall has demonstrated in works like Atlantis and Interpretation from 1946, the numbers used in Plato's description of Atlantis have a Kabbalistic quality to them, encoding important information about metaphysics that only fellow initiates of the mysteries or learned students of esoteric philosophy can decipher. While there are indeed mythic and allegorical aspects to Plato's account of Atlantis, the core idea he puts forward about the sinking of an island continent in the Atlantic and the destruction of a once powerful maritime empire does appear to be factual, with similar accounts preserved in the myths and legends of nearly all ancient cultures. The legacy of Atlantis was most prominently preserved in the ancient Olmec civilization of Mesoamerica and in the early dynasties of Egypt. According to Hall, these two civilization groups originated as offshoots of the primordial Atlantean race, each founded by refugees fleeing the destruction of their native homeland. The myths of both civilizations more or less admit to this, with each stating in no uncertain terms that their culture was originally established by descendants of an older parent civilization that had been destroyed in a cataclysm. The similarities they share in culture, architecture, and racial characteristics also support the theory that both were derived from a single parent civilization. From a geological standpoint, there is evidence to suggest that an Atlantean island continent similar to that described by Plato may have indeed once existed in the mid-Atlantic region, with the present-day Azore Islands being the last remaining remnant of a landmass once approximating the size of Ireland. Hall informs us that this island continent had originally been part of a yet greater continental structure which sank gradually over a long period of time. The great cataclysms associated with the ending of the Younger Dryas in 9600 BC provided the final death blow to this sinking landmass, marking the final end of the Atlantean era. To explain how an island continent can physically disappear, a central topic of concern is the accuracy of modern geology's favorite theory about plate tectonics. Is the present continental distribution best explained by the current theory of continental drift, or are there alternate mechanisms in the Earth's crust that allow for land masses to rise and fall? Theosophical scholar David Pratt has put forward a convincing critique of plate tectonics, arguing that continental landmasses tend to rise and fall over long periods of time rather than drift, an idea aligning with the teachings of esoteric philosophy. In the conclusion to a long article on the topic titled Sunken Continents vs. Continental Drift, published on his website, davidpratt.info, Pratt writes, quote, "Plate tectonics certainly faces some overwhelming problems. Far from being a simple, elegant, all-embracing global theory, it is confronted with a multitude of observational anomalies and has had to be patched up with a complex variety of ad hoc modifications and auxiliary hypotheses. The existence of deep continental roots and absence of a continuous global asthenosphere to lubricate plate motions have rendered the classical model of plate movements untenable. There is no consensus on the thickness of the plates and no certainty as to the forces responsible for their supposed movement. The hypotheses of large-scale continental drift, seafloor spreading, and subduction, and the relative youth of the oceanic crust are contradicted by a considerable volume of data. Evidence for substantial vertical crustal movements and for significant amounts of submerged continental crust in the present-day oceans poses another major challenge to plate tectonics. Such evidence provides increasing confirmation of the periodic alternation of land and sea taught by philosophy." End quote. Pratt's critiques of plate tectonics opens the door for an alternate explanation to be considered, one that aligns with the esoteric teachings of Hall and Blavatsky. As Pratt explains, according to modern theosophy, Poseidonis, Plato's Atlantis, was an island about the size of Ireland situated in the Atlantic Ocean opposite the Strait of Gibraltar, and sank in a major cataclysm in 9565 BC. Former exploration geologist Christian O'Brien believes that Posidonis was a large mid-Atlantic ridge island centered on the Azores. By contouring the seabed, he found that the Azores were separated and surrounded by a net of submarine valleys that had all the hallmarks of having once been river valleys on the surface. He concluded that the island had once measured 720 kilometers across from east to west and 480 kilometers from north to south, with high mountain ranges rising over 3,660 meters above sea level. Before or during its submergence, it tilted about 0.4 degrees, with the result that the south coast sank about 3,355 meters, but the north coast only some 1,830 meters. Only the volcanic peaks remained above the waters and now form the 9 volcanic islands of the Azores. O'Brien thinks that the island could have sunk within a period of a few years or even months, and points out that 6 areas of hot spring fields associated with volcanic disturbances are known in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge area, and 4 of them lie in the Cane Atlantis area close to the Azores, end quote. This new research makes the sinking of Atlantis a realistic possibility, particularly when we discover Plato's statement that, quote, prodigious earthquakes and deluges accompanied the event, with the Atlantic island absorbed in the sea, becoming entirely disappeared. But while we may have discovered the geological mechanism behind Atlantis' disappearance, the specific trigger event that caused its sinking remains a mystery. Other mysterious circumstances also accompany this important historical date, such as the climate's sudden shift out of the Younger Dryas cooling period and into the warmer Holocene era. The construction of the Göbekli Tepe temple complex in present-day Turkey also occurred around this date. This massive site was built by an unknown culture and then deliberately buried as if to preserve it for future discovery. Its burial took place around 9600 BC, the same date marking the end of the Younger Dryas, the sinking of Atlantis, and the Great Year's transition into the Treta Yuga. Graham Hancock believes that one of the primary functions of the Göbekli Tepe temple complex was to commemorate a technology transfer between the remnants of a declining high civilization of prehistory and the comparatively primitive tribal peoples of ancient Mesopotamia. This idea is supported by ancient myths from the region, which state that after a previous race of humans was wiped out by the gods in a great cataclysm, 7 sages led by the god-man Oannes emerged out of the sea, bringing knowledge of agriculture, architecture, and astronomy to the primitive peoples of the Fertile Crescent. Myths from Egypt, Central America, Asia, and other regions around the world offer similar accounts. None of these cultures claim to have been the original inventors of their own civilization. Instead, each declared that the most noble aspects of their civilization had been bestowed to their primitive ancestors by a previous race whose homeland had been destroyed in a great cataclysm. In the case of Mesopotamia, historical records show that agriculture did indeed begin just after Göbekli Tepe was built, suggesting that the site may have been built to commemorate the transfer of technology between the doomed Atlanteans and the primitive tribes existing at the periphery of their empire, with the former disappearing from Earth after first planting the seed of cultural development within the latter. A particularly intriguing aspect of the Göbekli Tepe mystery involves the carvings contained on one of the stone pillars unearthed at the site, the Vulture Stone. According to Dr. Martin Sweatman, the carvings on this pillar indicate the sun's alignment with the cusp of Sagittarius Scorpio. As previously discussed, the Sagittarius-Scorpio cusp marks the point on the ecliptic that intersects with the position of the galactic center. Presuming that the artwork on this recovered artifact is referencing the Summer Solstice sun, a key date in the cycle of the Great Year is being deliberately referenced, 10,900 BC, the date when the Younger Dryas first began. Archaeological evidence indicates that construction on the Göbekli Tepe temple complex initially began 1,200 years later, around 9600 BC, when the Younger Dryas came to its abrupt end. The Vulture Stone and the temple itself thus signify the 2 bookends of the cataclysmos phase of the Great Year supercycle, marking the occasion when the planet underwent an archetypal baptism by water. And I have an artistic illustration in the article of this Vulture Stone, which you can see. So that finishes that section. All right, the next section is called The Great Year Reaches Its Alpha Omega Point. And now that we've looked at the cataclysmos period, which occurred half a cycle ago and is marked by these several intersection of events: the sinking of Atlantis, the end of the Younger Dryas, the beginning of the Holocene, and astronomically, this was the time when the summer solstice sun would have risen on the cusp of Sagittarius and Scorpio, to the exact opposite of where it is today. Those things all took place at the same period and marked a period of transformation on the planet, and the themes of that transformation fit into this idea of a baptism by water. And so now, today, we're reaching the opposite of that. We're reaching the baptism by fire, or the ekpyrosis. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this section. Here we come to an important point, one that adds critical philosophical context to everything we've discussed thus far in the book. At the present moment, the summer solstice sun is nearing the cusp of Gemini Taurus, marking its alignment with the galactic anticenter and the AA point of the zodiac. Meanwhile, the winter solstice sun approaches the cusp of Sagittarius Scorpio, signaling its convergence with the galactic center. This rare celestial configuration, where the solstices align with the galactic plane, signals the world entering into the death rebirth phase of the 25,800 year Great Year supercycle. One grand age is drawing to a close and another stands ready to begin. It is a moment of cosmic transition, one that invites civilizational and psycho-spiritual reckoning and renewal on a global scale. Peter Dawkins associates the period of death and renewal that the world is now entering into with the arrival of a purifying baptism by fire. He also associates it with the ritualistic death and rebirth of the phoenix. Just as the phoenix is consumed in flames only to rise anew from its ashes, the AA point of the Great Year instigates a period of fiery purification within the soul of mankind, setting the stage for its rebirth at a new and higher level. Bibu Dev Misra associates this period with a 1200-year period of cosmic purging. According to his model of the Yuga system, this period of mass initiation is set to begin imminently after the Kali Yuga reaches its conclusion in 2025, the year of this book's publication. Although it will be a time of trial and testing, this period will ultimately serve to liberate man from its infatuation with materialism, while also destroying crystallized institutions and entrenched power structures whose perpetuation is inhibiting social progress. In esoteric philosophy, the element of fire serves as both a destroyer and a purifier, burning away the decayed remnants of the past in order to clear the way for future growth. The baptism by fire that the world is now entering into will be keyed around this theme, cleansing us of the negative elements that we are maintaining within ourselves, but which have no part in the new age we are being prepared for rebirth into. The reach of this cosmic baptism's cleansing fire may extend beyond the domain of human civilization and incorporate the Earth's geophysical environment. This is certainly what happened during the preceding cataclysmos period, which took place exactly one half cycle ago. This watery apocalypse not only triggered the destruction of an ancient civilization, but also significantly altered the climate and physical geography of the Earth. During the upcoming ekpyrosis phase of the Great Year, can we expect similarly drastic transformations to occur, this time emphasizing the theme of fire rather than water in the way they manifest their influence upon the planet? So that is the end of that section. That's a short one, but it's just making the case that we're now entering into the inverse period of what took out Atlantis. So there's a direct karmic connection between our civilization today, which sits at the cusp of global government, and Atlantis, which existed a full half cycle ago, which was a global civilization that collapsed. So it collapsed at the midpoint, and now it seems like it's being resurrected in the modern age as the cycle comes to its end. And so we're going to be discussing that in the next section, which is called The Shadow of Atlantis Resurfaces. The idea that humanity is now entering into a collective initiation helps illuminate why the themes of death and rebirth are so pervasive in present world trends. For example, consider how the theme of death pervades the dissolution of American empire, the teetering of global capitalism, the great poisoning of the population by the agribusiness, medical, and petrochemical sectors, the destabilization of the environment after centuries of industrial pollution, and the rising disillusionment that many feel toward modern society and its elite ruling classes. Consider how the theme of rebirth can be found in the looming shift to global government, the growing interest in esotericism and the mysteries of human histories, suggesting a philosophical renaissance is forthcoming, the end of atheism and scientific materialism, the transition from capitalism to technocracy, and the new economic possibilities that will arise from the use of etheric energy technologies once they are ready to be unveiled. If it is indeed true that today the planet is moving into a period of planetary rebirth, then in accordance with the archetypal design of the initiation process, we should expect mankind to pass through a symbolic confrontation with the dweller on the threshold, an archetypal adversary that emerges as the personification of one's inner shadow complexes and accumulated negative karma. During key phases of the initiation process, it surfaces and acts upon the disciple, forcing them to either confront the negative karma that it symbolizes or be destroyed by its assault. Although it is a menacing figure, the dweller is ultimately an instrument of evolution. By personifying our own failures, weaknesses, and compulsions and projecting them back at us, it forces us to engage constructively with our inner shadow complexes and prepares us to advance in our evolution. The dweller that mankind must confront during its forthcoming baptism by fire will emerge in a series of symbolic forms that personify the sins of our civilization. For example, the intertwined petrochemical, agribusiness, and medical industries, forming together what activist Vandana Shiva calls the poison cartel, can be viewed as a manifestation of the dweller archetype, with this corporate syndicate personifying the evils of scientific materialism, financial capitalism, and imperial domination. So long as this cartel persists, the dweller will continue to use it against us, destroying our health and preventing our social progress. The karmic causes of the present world crisis can all be traced back to Atlantis, the primordial empire that fell victim to its shadow and was destroyed as a consequence. Since its demise, the Atlantean archetype has recapitulated itself in the story of every empire to subsequently emerge. In each case, a ruling elite becomes possessed by its inner shadow and seeks, like the Atlantean kings of old, to expand its fiefdom through the subjugation of the masses. This imperial overreach creates negative karma, which eventually reacts back upon the empire, bringing its destruction. According to Plato, the Atlantean Empire was destroyed by an environmental catastrophe while attempting to militarily invade the prehistoric Grecian states and subjugate them under its rule. Its capital city disappeared under the Atlantic Ocean before these wrongs could be set right, leaving the unconscious compulsions that drove this behavior unaddressed. The negative karma of Atlantis was then carried forward into the post-Diluvian era, where it continued to manifest its influence. Every empire to exist within the past 12 millennia encodes Atlantis' karmic legacy in its story, with the modern American empire rising as the culmination of this motion. Considering the fall of Atlantis occurred at the exact midpoint of the Great Year, it makes sense that its destiny would be to collapse without rectifying its negative karma, leaving it to be carried forward into the second half of the supercycle, where it would continue to manifest its influence, shaping the rise and fall of successive waves of empires, from Egypt to Britain. By implication, the American Empire, whose saga comes at the very end of this cosmic supercycle, is fated to be the final empire in this sequence. Here, an existential showdown with the inherited karma of lost Atlantis must take place, with an epic fight with the shadow set to occur alongside the world's entry into the ekpyrosis, or baptism by fire phase of the Great Year. All right, so we're going to pick up with this discussion in the next section, which is called America is the New Atlantis. For the past 12,000 years, human civilization has been unable to break free from the pull of Atlantis' lingering shadow, with every empire arising within this time span meeting the same inevitable fate as its Atlantean progenitor. Today, the American Empire is being pulled toward the same destiny with its shadow, expressed most prominently within the various factions comprising its deep state, driving it towards self-destruction. The karmic link between fallen Atlantis and modern America is evidenced in the striking similarities the two share. For example, Atlantis was said to have ruled over a vast global empire, exerting its dominion over distant territories. The American Empire has accomplished a similar feat, extending its reach across the world by means of an extensive system of diplomatic initiatives, military force, and economic warfare. Both civilizations at their peak wielded immense hegemonic power, yet both also faced internal decay from within, setting the stage for an eventual collapse. As they approached their final days, each entered into a phase of imperial overreach as their ruling elites desperately attempted to keep their sinking empires afloat. For example, Plato reveals in his works Timaeus and Critias that just before the Atlantean Empire's collapse, it had declared war on the prehistoric Greek states, sending against them a large war party in an attempt to subjugate them under Atlantean rule. In modern times, America has pursued a similar imperial agenda, aggressively expanding the dominion of its hegemony while preventing any viable organized resistance from forming. Another similarity between Atlantis and America comes with the misuse of technology and science. Atlantean civilization is often depicted as highly advanced with knowledge of technology, engineering, astronomy, metaphysics, and ceremonial magic. American civilization has likewise developed advanced sciences and technologies which at the most classified levels veer into the same domains of metaphysical energy that the Atlantean magician priests once manipulated in their occult rituals. In both cases, advanced knowledge of metaphysics fell into misuse, weaponized by a corrupt elite in the effort of imperial domination. According to Hall, the Atlanteans' manipulation of the ether triggered a terrible catastrophe, causing the environmental devastation that destroyed their civilization. Given the karmic linkage between ancient Atlantis and modern America, we might expect a similar outcome to repeat today. Recall Tesla's warning about the unimaginable destruction that the misuse of etheric energy can bring about if weaponized. That's something I cited in a chapter in the book. While the Atlantean and American empires share similar Armageddon themes in common, there are also important differences separating the two. Namely, Atlantis' fall came at the midpoint of the Great Year, coinciding with the onset of a planetary baptism by water. The present world crisis, by contrast, is playing out at the supercycle's alpha-omega point. This key difference suggests that we are not necessarily destined to succumb to the same fate as our Atlantean ancestors, with civilization utterly destroyed by an apocalyptic event. Instead, man's destiny in the present era is to emerge on the other side of the forthcoming baptism by water in a purified condition, ready for rebirth into a new and higher cycle of evolutionary growth. Atlantis' demise, occurring at the Great Year's midpoint, set the stage for the past 12,000 years of human history to occur, infusing its karmic influence into the story of human development over this period. The inherited karma of Atlantis has remained within the soul of mankind throughout this period for the simple reason that we are all reincarnated Atlanteans. We once lived through and participated in its collapse and have carried forward the karma we accumulated during this epoch into the present era. Manly Hall teaches that, quote, when man sets in motion the wheel of karma, he must abide by the consequences until by merit he achieves his own redemption. In this way, the old Atlantis is not truly gone, it is now emerging through man. The civilization we are building today is the resurrection of Atlantis, end quote. America is the epicenter of this Atlantean resurrection, the place where the inherited karma of lost Atlantis is recurring most potently. For this reason, it is within America that mankind's archetypal fight with the shadow must be fought and won. It is no coincidence that Atlantis' fall came at the exact midpoint of the Great Year, nor that the American Empire is moving into its final endgame as it approaches this alpha-omega point. This cosmic synchronicity is evidence of the karmic link that America and Atlantis share, suggesting that the saga of American Empire will coincide with the final showdown with the karmic specter of a fallen Atlantis. This time, it is our destiny to emerge victorious from this battle, ready and willing for rebirth into a new cosmic age. The fact that we have now reached the Great Year's alpha-omega point suggests that humanity is now intended to address the root causes within itself that led to Atlantis' original demise. In so doing, we have the opportunity to finally liberate ourselves of the sins of the past, setting the stage for civilization's rebirth into a new evolutionary era. Manly P. Hall poetically summarizes the situation mankind now finds itself in, writing, quote, our world stands as Atlantis stood. Our buildings rise upward. There are many towers pointing to the skies. Our libraries are filled with ancient wisdom. Our scientists and philosophers are exploring the mysteries of nature. Again, we fly through the air and under the sea. Again, we walk the path that Atlantis walked. But we must go on. We must strive to attain the glory of a greater work. For a day we have forgotten the things we were. A veil conceals the past that we may learn our lessons in a different way. We are unfolding new powers, building new faculties, mastering new arts, creating new ideals. It is our duty to take the best that Atlantis had to give and use them as steps to build on for a new temple, one based upon the foundations of the old. All right, and that brings us to the last section we're going to be discussing today, which is called the Philosophic Empire and the World Nation. In the 12 millennia that have transpired since the demise of Atlantis, new powers and potentials have been activated within the human soul and put into development. On an individual level, these include the intellect, ego, and physical sense perceptions. Collectively, they involve the birth of institutions like science, philosophy, and democracy. The Atlanteans were naturally clairvoyant, with the intellect, ego, and physical sense perceptions existing in a more rudimentary form. Their clairvoyancy affected how they formed mental images and engaged with the elements of their subconscious. It also influenced how they organized their social order, with Atlantean society being the progenitor of the caste system. After Atlantis' demise, mankind lost access to its innate power of clairvoyancy. In its place, however, new psychological capacities began to develop and new social institutions emerged. Theosophist and philosopher Annie Besant summarizes the shifts in the human race that have taken place since the fall of Atlantis, emphasizing in particular the development of the ego, which governs the expression of self-will. She writes, quote, "In the working out of law in this universe where men are evolving, wills also evolve, which are separate, personal, and individual. All the confusion in the world of man is due to this evolution of the separated wills that do not recognize their root in God, but try to follow their own diverse ways and want to move after their own separated fashion, so that in the world of man, as nowhere else in nature, you have discord instead of harmony, clashing instead of peace, struggle and war instead of tranquility. But there is a pattern, plan, and purpose behind the struggle. In man, there awakens the germ of the will. This separated will, which brings about discord, will yet end in something greater and richer. For when human evolution is over, millions of separated souls will join in one mighty chord of harmonious union." Besant points out that the development of the ego coincides with the sharpening of the intellect. The forces of evolution have been working diligently upon each of these principles since the fall of Atlantis. Now that we are approaching the end of the great year, we can expect that we will be required to fully mature both psychic capacities before our initiation is complete and the gateways for entry into a new cosmic cycle open up to us. Discussing the relationship between the crisis of modernity and the intellect's development process, Besant writes, quote, "We are in the very crisis of intellectual evolution. Characteristic of that stage of evolution is division and separation, and the place of the individual apart from and somewhat in conflict with other individuals. As the intellect is working out its development, it must maintain this position of division and conflict. But eventually, as it matures, it overcomes the need for antagonism and is free to focus its attention on synthesis and unity." Expounding upon this point, Besant states, quote, "The mental world is a world of phenomenon. Its characteristic is diversity, each being standing by himself and regarding other things as separate. You cannot think of unity unless you have seen variety. You cannot recognize likeness until you have seen unlikeness. The characteristic of intellectual evolution is the discrimination of differences followed by the recognition of likeness. Analysis precedes synthesis. Differences are seen before an underlying unity is developed." Manly P. Hall builds on her point, stating, quote, "By exploring every possible aspect of the world as thought and experience, we are gradually but inevitably approaching the realization of unity. Through diversity, we are becoming aware of unity. Through the many, we are discovering the one. And when that discovery is complete, we shall be aware of the dignity of the one, because we have examined thoroughly all of its parts and members." Simply put, the prolonged period of conflict that mankind has experienced since Atlantis' demise has been necessary because it sets the stage for a higher evolutionary synthesis to be achieved. As Besant describes, evolution's long-term goal is to, quote, "make the I or ego a strong center, a separate center. There must be clearly defined center of consciousness within each individual. And by necessity, that center grows by struggle. The struggle is necessary only up to a point, however. Conflict stimulates us to grow, and in the process of growing, we eventually outgrow the need for conflict. If our destiny requires us to perfect the intellect and ego principles, how do we go about actually accomplishing this? As the end of the Kali Yuga draws near, mankind remains locked in a state of discord, ignorance, and confusion, with the ego still enthralled with its individuality and the intellect preoccupied with materialistic infatuations and superstitions. What resource can we turn to help us overcome this dire situation? The answer is philosophy, as practiced and defined by Pythagoras, the original coiner of the term. Philosophy contains the core set of wisdom teachings and mental disciplines that the human race requires to fulfill its evolutionary destiny, including the perfection of the ego and intellect principles. For this reason, philosophy is the vital resource we must turn to and embrace during the critical period of cosmic initiation we are entering into. As Manly Hall exclaims, quote, "Philosophy is the great need of our world. We have struggled on for ages without it, and we have failed and failed dismally. We have tried to substitute industry, economics, and policy for that basic internal and intellectual integrity which is indispensable to our survival. For the past 12 millennia, Earth has provided mankind with a fertile environment within which to experiment with and explore the capacities of its ego principle. But today, as technology reaches a critical stage of development, global crises are reaching a critical mass, and the age of global government is fast approaching, this era of unrestrained ego expression must come to an end. We no longer have the same leeway to make mistakes and get away with it that we used to. The weaponry now available to us has become too powerful. Therefore, it is time that we turn to and embrace the one resource that can successfully discipline the ego while drawing out its full powers and potentials: philosophy. Plato, the enlightened Greek philosopher who lived about a century after Pythagoras, went full circle in his teachings, describing not only the karmic underpinnings of Atlantis' demise, but also the key to its redemption, leading to the establishment of the new Atlantis. The key is philosophy. It is only when the political, economic, and cultural leaders of society become philosophers that the final redemption of Atlantis can be achieved, a vision of utopia that Plato termed the philosophic empire. Discussing the critical importance of philosophy, Hall states that, quote, "Philosophy reveals to man his kinship with the all. It shows him that he is a brother to the suns which dot the firmament. It lifts him from a taxpayer on a whirling atom to a citizen of the cosmos. It teaches him that while physically bound to the earth, of which his blood and bones are part, there is nevertheless within him a spiritual power, a divine self, through which he is one with the symphony of the whole. Philosophy is the secret ingredient required for mankind to reach the next stage of its evolutionary development. For this reason, the golden age of the future can only be achieved when society situates itself atop a firm foundation of philosophic education." As Hall declares, quote, "Each child coming into the world should be taught that the spiritual life within him is the greatest and most important part of himself. Therefore, we must begin by teaching our young to understand that they bear witness to an eternal spirit within themselves. If they are true to that spirit, their world is happy. If they fail that spirit, they are unhappy and their world falls. That is education. That is the beginning of the creation of a moral universe. That is the beginning of the ethical association of humankind. And the ethical association of humankind is the beginning of the Platonic Empire, for the Platonic Empire is based upon the supremacy of the spiritual purpose of man over the material selfishness of his personality." In Plato's vision, the philosophic empire arises as a globally unified civilization dedicated to advancing human evolution and perfecting mankind's relationship with other orders of life existing beyond himself. To fulfill this destiny, the philosophic empire weds together within its structure the institutions of democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy, balancing all three in perfect equilibrium. To understand how, let's consider how democracy fits into the picture. Building off the teachings of Plato, Manly Hall explains that a successful democracy requires an educated populace, for the reason that in a democratic way of life, the very survival of the state depends upon the intelligent cooperation of its people. Thus, a true democracy, whether absolute or representative, can succeed only when the average citizen becomes informed in the privileges and responsibilities of government. To achieve this ideal, a comprehensive system of philosophical education is required, since philosophy is the only discipline that teaches man to be truly self-governing. As Hall puts it, man must be internally educated in values before he can administer himself. And until he can administer himself, he cannot be part of an enduring state ruled by a system which has as its very keynote the fact that the individual is a self-governing unit. While Plato's vision of the philosophic empire is grounded in democracy, its practice of it comes with the caveat that those entrusted to participate in the democratic process must first earn the right to do so by passing through a curriculum of philosophic education. The reason why is simple. To participate in the governance of others, you must first prove that you are capable of self-governance, something only philosophy can adequately prepare you for. The question of how oligarchy, the rule of the few over the many, fits into Plato's vision of the philosophic empire is easily solved once we consider how schools and universities are structured. Within each, a natural pedagogical hierarchy is revealed, with an elite faculty of teachers, mature in knowledge, wisdom, and experience, instructing a student body that is comparatively less worldly or informed. The faculty's earned authority over the student body, creating a dynamic of the few over the many, is the root idea behind Plato's concept of the philosophic elect. As Manly Hall explains, Plato, quote, realized that all men were not fitted for a high degree of spiritual realization, but he reasoned that the state was not ruled by all men, but rather by a small group of men who lead and direct the destiny of the rest. He knew that the men who lead must know and understand. If these men lacked vision, then all the nation must perish. From these realizations, Plato evolved his system of government by the philosophic elect. His ideal state was that in which wise men protected and instructed the uninformed. In the philosophic empire, the authority of the philosophic elect is democratically acknowledged, with elected representatives doubling as philosophic teachers and sages. This outcome requires the institutions of government, democracy, and education to be explicitly wed together. Elaborating, Hall informs us that, quote, Plato's government was a kind of school. Some were teachers, others scholars. But as the schoolboy acknowledges the superior attainment of his teacher, so all men should acknowledge the superior attainments of the wise. In this way, Plato, quote, envisioned the state as the teacher of its people. Religion, science, art, literature, and all the cultural parts of knowledge together constituted the state. The temple was the city hall, and around this central axis of philosophical enlightenment, the community rotated, with all the life and industry of the people being geared towards this central motif. Ultimately, Plato's plan is social rather than political. It would transform states or nations into social orders, removing the political interference and establishing government as community service and community cooperation. Finally, Plato's depiction of how monarchy fits into the picture of the philosophic empire is best understood once you consider that he, like Pythagoras before him, was an initiate of the Greek mystery schools. Plato modeled his concept of the ideal system of government based upon the archetypal design of the mysteries, in which an outer student body of disciples was led by an elite faculty of initiated philosophers who in turn served the will of a supreme hierophant or adept, the philosopher king. Manly P. Hall, himself an initiate of the mysteries, informs us that, quote, Plato's concept of the empire of the wise, ruled over by the philosophic king, was but a political enlargement of the pattern of the mystery schools and the perfected men who govern them. The philosopher king is the natural leader of mankind, the good shepherd, and the representative on earth of the sovereign gods. What qualifies the philosopher king to serve as headmaster of a mystery school is the advanced degree of initiation they have achieved. These are old souls having attained an extremely high degree of evolutionary completion in past lives. Their focus resides now primarily in the metaphysical rather than physical dimensions of reality. From their lofty vantage point in the etheric field surrounding the planet, they oversee the operations of an entire mystery school ecosystem. If a society built upon the lofty ideals of Plato's philosophic empire seems unrealistic, just remember that we are evaluating his utopian vision from a mind state still trapped within the boundaries of the Kali Yuga. Thankfully, this millennia-spanning dark age is soon scheduled to come to an end. When we attempt to imagine what the restoration of civilization might look like on the other side of this transition out of the dark age, we inevitably return to Plato's idealistic vision of the philosophic empire. It describes an archetype that our civilization has no choice but to fulfill. There is no alternate pathway forward. Our task is therefore not to invent a new solution for the future, but to rediscover one that has already been bestowed to us and make it a reality on a global scale. Plato's vision of the philosophic empire represents the highest ideal that the world nation can hope to achieve. It is the singular archetype that the coming era of global government must strive to attain. If global government is inevitable and imminent, shouldn't we strive to build it atop democratic foundations, with philosophy installed as the basis of its culture, and with a mystery school enthroned at the heart of its government? So that in turn sets the stage for the next section, which is called the technocratic superstate and the mystery schools. But we're not going to go over that today. We're gonna revisit that in the future. But you can read it now if you get the book. So that's where I'm going to conclude things today. We began things by looking at time cycles and where we are today within a greater time cycle, and then we move gradually forward to look at Atlantis and then America's relation to Atlantis, and how America is being driven towards a destiny that is tied to the fate of the world in the present era and to the dynamics of this underlying cosmic cycle that's taking place. So that is where we finished off at, with this idea of where are we headed to after the American Empire is finished, and then what will be reborn in its place. And the only vision that we have for where to go, it's this philosophical vision that Plato bestowed to us called the philosophic empire. And I'm going to talk about in the concluding sections of the essay how this institution that I analyze in detail in the main body of the book, which I call the technocratic superstate, how this is going to be the vehicle that is going to fulfill this destiny ultimately in its fully mature form. It's going to fulfill the destiny of this philosophic empire, and it's going to do so in alignment with the updated vision of this empire that Francis Bacon put forward in his book, The New Atlantis. And this represents a scientific age concept of a utopia with the global order centered around a university system. And this university system is really, in its highest form, a philosophical school, and it becomes a mystery school. So that's what is discussed in the rest of this section, and get the book to read the rest of that. So for now, I'm going to conclude the episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and keep an eye on the Substack. I've been publishing these different parts serially over the past week, and you can read each of these on the Substack. And if you're a paid subscriber on the Substack, you can get a PDF of the whole book. So check that out. Check out my website, alexsakin.com, and I have my e-store is up again, so I have some merch, and next week I should be getting the physical copies of the book in. So if you want to get a physical copy from me, a signed copy, you can do that. That'll be available in the store. So keep an eye on that, and I'll be back with you soon. Take care. God bless.